Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm your host this morning. I'd like you to be aware of why we call this America's Voice Now, because I think we represent, unlike all of the other organizations out there, we truly represent what America thinks. The difference is we tell it. No longer will we sit by and allow others to push propaganda down our throats. No longer will we hide in the shadows and say, I'm afraid to speak. No, first of all, the principle that any government would make you fearful to speak out your mind is just an abomination. That's not what America was founded upon. So this morning, for my bullet points, I'm going to address an absolute abomination of an individual, Mr. Harry Reid. And I use the term Mr. with sarcasm and cynicism. This pathetic, pencil-necked piece of human trash who leads our Senate and is a traitor and has acted treasonously against our nation for decades, had the unmitigated gall to come out in a statement the other day and indicate that the sequestration was responsible for the death of 8 Marines. Now, the death of 8 Marines is a tragedy, but to exploit that by utilizing or to prop that up and exploit that with the concept that it was as a result of sequestration is the epitome of callousness, politicism, and truly shows Harry Reid to be the hapless hack that he is. Mr. Reid should be removed from Congress, forcibly, if need be, by his own constituency. They should go and have a state referendum to remove this scumbag from office. He is scum. An absolute piece of trash. And I, for one, am sick and tired of him running our nation. He blocks legislation that he doesn't like. He is the reason, predominantly, why we have had no budget for all of Obama's presidency. And now he comes out and says that as a result of sequestration, this tragedy occurred. One commenter's statement is, the most charitable way to read Mr. Reid's comments, using the Marine Corps corpses as political props to bleat for higher taxes and more spending by claiming that sequestration will lead to substandard training and more such incidents. The uncharitable reading has him insinuating that sequestration directly caused this tragic accident, which makes him either a gibbering which would make him a gibbering lunatic instead of just a greedy, bottom-feeding political hack. I love the language because it's absolutely true. He is a gibbering lunatic, and he is a greedy, bottom-feeding political hack who steals from his own constituency, steals from the United States of America, steals from the country and the nation to which he has sworn an oath. He enriches himself on the backs of the peasantry. Mr. Reid's time is done. When I see him on camera, my stomach roils. 1, with disgust, and 2, with anger. The Marine Corps has actually come out and told real clear politics. Now, I can tell you, Marine Corps officials this afternoon are taking a strong exception to what Harry Reid implied, saying that this exercise for example, was planned well in advance, had nothing to do with budget cuts. There were no corners cut, and if they couldn't afford to have all the safety precautions into place, they wouldn't have done the exercise. One Marine official actually told us a short time ago he considers this nothing but pure political posturing on the backs of dead Marines. Harry Reid is dancing on the backs of our dead soldiers. He is an exploitive piece of human offal. O-F-F-A-L. In other words, offal is oftentimes referred to as either the innards. When you gut a deer, the offal is what comes out, and or human excrement. That is Mr. Reid. And if you look up the word awful in the dictionary, Harry Reid's face gloriously appears. I find him a despicable and disgusting human being who has polluted our gene pool. He and his children enrich themselves on the back of Nevadans and the United States of America. And they are political hacks. Would that I could remove gravity from Washington, D.C., and watch all of that polluted trash just float off into space. Goodness, I would give anything for the power to just evaporate that entire solution right up into the atmosphere. Our country would be better off for it. If only I were a magician. Okay. Our next story in our next segment is going to deal with a federal judge who has overturned Missouri's law nullifying the contraception mandate that was issued by the Obamacare ACA. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the principles of nullification and interposition, let's clarify what they are and where they come from. When we go over this story, I want you to recognize that apparently this judge slept through the class on sovereignty and states' rights. She apparently has never read Thomas Jefferson, Madison, Calhoun, Adams, Washington, Patrick Henry, Daniel Webster, Giles, Smith, Judge Apsher, and many, 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 many others. She has the nerve to say that the federal that the federal law overrides state rights. I beg to differ. If you had read any of our founders' documents and statements, you would know that the courts are not the final arbiters of law. And lawlessness is lawlessness. And no rationalization or thought process, no matter how convoluted or twisted, can make it right. You can go back to Cicero to understand that. This judge, Audrey Fleissing, has issued a temporary restraining order, and we want Chris Koster to continue to appeal and fight this. I'm going to ask you to call his office and put your 2 cents in. Make sure that he's got all the backing he needs to fight this treason. Treason! That's the word. We'll be right back.
The area's best selection of firearms, ammunition, and accessories can only be found at West Plains Pawn and Jewelry, your Class 3 dealer for automatic weapons and suppressors, including Gemtech and Huntertown, with a great selection of holsters, slings, magazines, and gun storage options. West Plains Pawn and Jewelry will also do special orders. With new arrivals every week, the area's best selection of firearms, ammunition, and accessories can only be found at West Plains Pawn and Jewelry, 1713 West US Highway 160, or shop online at westplainspawn.com.
There is this product on Amazon that is simply going crazy. The banana slicer, almost 2,500 consumer reviews. I've been trying to come up with an ideal way to slice a banana. Use a knife, they say. Well, my parole officer won't let me around knives. Or how about this one? What can I say about the banana slicer that hasn't already been said about the wheel or penicillin? Obviously, just a pure hoax.
Saturdays noon to 3 and weekdays at 7:35 for your Digital Minute. It's Kim Commando on the Ozarks Best News Talk 107.1.
If you've never done this before, let today be your first day. Get yourself a pen and a piece of paper and write down the phone number I'm going to give you. Koster's office must appeal this. And by the end of this show, if you're not thoroughly convinced of that, start listening to some music channel because you're listening to the wrong guy. He needs our backup and our confirmation that this is what we want as a state. That we want to fight federal tyranny and we want to fight federal treason. Here's the case. By the way, this is all up on our Facebook page. It's all up on our website. So you can find this story right there. The federal judge overturns Missouri law nullifying contraception mandate, claiming that in a conflict between state and federal law always prevails. A federal judge overturned a Missouri law that exempts employers who object to birth control from the Obamacare contraception mandate. The law was passed in the state legislature last year over the veto of Governor Nixon. So here's the deal. Understand the legislative process. The House and the Senate voted. Governor vetoed. House and legislature overrode his veto. A clear mandate from the people. We passed it last year. Federal government sued us. Requires insurers to issue policies without contraception coverage if individuals or employers assert that the use of birth control violates their, quote, moral, ethical, or religious beliefs. Fairly easy to understand. If you have a moral, ethical, or religious problem with contraception, you have the right to opt out. That is called freedom of religion. That is called freedom to make up your own mind, something our nation has lost, something which our federal government refuses to accept, a basic foundational principle that you are entitled to the natural law of life, liberty, property ownership, and the pursuit of happiness. And if pursuit of happiness means that you make up your own mind about your own moral, ethical, and religious beliefs, you have that right. If you haven't gotten a piece of paper, get one now. This whole process was a very blatant and clear attempt to counter the Obama administration's ACA that would demand that all health insurers cover contraception at no cost, even when the employer has a moral, ethical, or religious problem with issuing that type of policy. The law was challenged by insurance providers seeking to keep themselves out of a legal jeopardy position. In other words, this actual lawsuit was filed by the insurance companies themselves, not because they gave a darn one way or the other about it ethically, morally, or religiously, but because they didn't want to be caught in the scissors of a legal jeopardy problem. How many millions of dollars of insurance premiums are being spent to fight a problem, not because these insurers give a damn one way or the other, morally, ethically, or religiously, but because they don't want to be caught in the crossfire between a federal government run amok and out of control and the citizens' will themselves. If that doesn't show you the division line that this administration and this Congress has drawn amongst the people of the United States, I don't know what will. U.S. District Judge Audrey Fleissing, I don't know how you pronounce her name, who issued a temporary restraining order against the law back in December and struck it down on March 14th on the basis that the state law, wait till you hear this. If this doesn't make the top of your head warm enough to want to blow off, nothing will. Here's her statement. The state law, quote, is in conflict with and preempted by existing federal law and could force health insurers to risk fines and penalties by choosing between compliance with state or federal law. You've got to be kidding me. So what you're telling me is that because their financial interests are involved, and these insurers would risk fines and penalties by choosing between compliance with state or federal law, that you're going to void the will of the people and instead hand it over to insurers. Well, I'm going to challenge you. This is John Calhoun was a vice president, and he's been tossed under the bus many times. He was a House and Senate member. He served as a vice president under Adams and under Andrew Jackson. Okay, so he was vice president twice under two different presidents. Now, you know, historically, the guy's been tossed under the bus. In 1831, he wrote an address called the Fort Hill Address. And I'm reading this directly from Thomas Wood's excellent book, Nullification. And by the way, if you don't have this, you're missing the boat. Educate, inform, motivate, activate. What does that mean? That means get yourself educated. Become a subject matter expert on something that interests you. Inform others about it. Motivate yourself and them to take action. And then do that. This is an excerpt from one of his speeches, and it's particularly relevant to this issue. This is Calhoun. No one can have a higher respect for the maxim that the majority ought to govern than I have, taken in its proper sense, subject to the restrictions imposed by the Constitution, and confined to objects in which every portion of the community have similar interests. But it is a great error to suppose, as many do, that the right of a majority to govern is a natural and not a conventional right, and therefore absolute and unlimited. By nature, every individual has the right to govern himself, and governments, whether founded on majorities or minorities, must derive their right from the assent, express or implied of the governed, and be subject to such limitations as they may impose. Where the interests are the same, that is, where the laws that may benefit one will benefit all, or the reverse, it is just and proper to place them under the control of the majority. But where they are dissimilar, so that the law may benefit one portion, that the law that may benefit one portion may be ruinous to another, it would be, on the contrary, unjust and absurd to subject them to its will. And such I conceive to be the theory upon which our Constitution rests. Let's understand what he was actually saying. That our Constitution is based on the idea that the individual has a right to choose for himself or herself, and that it is never government's job to ram or mandate something down our throats which we don't want. This book, some 300, 400 pages, is replete with the principles of nullification. And it's apparent that Miss Fleissing has never read this book. It's apparent that she has never read anything by Thomas Jefferson or Mr. Madison, who actually were the founders of the Constitution and the writers of the document which she swore an oath to uphold. I don't know how you can swear to uphold an oath and a Constitution which either you have never read nor understand. I declare that it is imperative. First of all, it should be an absolute required minimum that anyone who runs for office, and I don't care whether you're running for the dog catcher or you're running for the President of the United States of America, that you should be able to recite and understand and thoroughly discuss, 1, our Constitution, 2, our constitutional principles, 3, you must have read the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers so that you have some basis by which upon you may make your decisions and claim your position. It should be required that anyone who runs for office, and I don't care who you are, and I don't care how big or small the job may be, that you have a foundational and logical and thoroughly indoctrinated understanding of the Constitution upon which you are passing law. Whatever you pass must have a constitutional foundation, or it may not exist. The whole principle of nullification declares plainly that if you pass a law that is unconstitutional on its face, that it can be declared nullified, null and void. And it is the state's obligation to interpose itself on behalf of its citizenry to protect them from government run amok. Miss Fleissing apparently has no concept of that principle. She based her position on the supremacy clause of the United States Constitution, which says, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Now, Miss Fleissing's opinion is apparently shared by the majority of judges and legal scholars. Let's understand why. First of all, they're not cognizant of the principles of nullification and interposition. Number one. Number two, that is their power base. So they have an axe to grind. And anytime you have an axe to grind, you cannot be a fair and impartial arbiter, because that is your power base. When does the slave rule against the master? When does the monster rule against itself? It's an age-old conflict of interest, ladies and gentlemen. When we come back, we're going to hammer through more of these principles of nullification. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to prepare and put together an entire week-long concept on the idea of nullification, because I want everybody to understand exactly what it is, what it does, and why it exists. We'll be right back.
Fox News Radio. I'm Chris Foster. The Middle East peace process, Iran's nuclear program, and Syria's civil war. The big topics for President Obama on his trip to Israel, arriving in Tel Aviv this morning.
We stand together because peace must come to the Holy Land.
The president greeted by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Thank you for unequivocally affirming Israel's sovereign right to defend itself by itself against any threat.
President Obama is scheduled to meet with Palestinian officials in the West Bank tomorrow. The calendar says it's the first day of spring.
More lake effect snow off of the Great Lakes expected today, with significant accumulations of over 6 inches possible through tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, across parts of Maine, storm totals could be anywhere between 8 to 14 inches of snow.
Fox meteorologist Maria Molina. The sun passed directly over the equator at 7:02 Eastern this morning. Fox News, we report, you decide.
Visit our outstanding sponsors, West Plains Pawn, located on Route 160, about a mile past Walmart on the right-hand side. West Plains Pawn can be found on the web at westplainspawn.com. You can also reach them via telephone at 417-256-3000. It's the battery station at 303 Washington Avenue, right off the square in West Plains. They can be reached via telephone at 417-257-7799. They can also be found on the web at batterystation.com. My friends at Ozark Mountain Self-Reliance. Brian can be reached at 870-492-4030, and he's located at 3225 Route 62, 1/2 mile east of Walmart in Mountain Home. Make sure that you visit our friends over at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard in West Plains. They have an outstanding lunch special buffet. You can have salad as well as pizza and other pasta, so you can have something tasty and something healthy. Bill Stone over at Stone Construction at 2930116. Bill Stone does remodeling, custom and new construction, light commercial, farm work, pretty much the gamut. If you're interested in doing some kind of a new project, make sure that you give Bill Stone at Stone Construction an opportunity to bid on that job. And my dear friend, Mary, over at Chantilly's Artisan Bakery, number 2 Evans Arcade, right off the square in West Plains. She can be reached via telephone at 255-2253. She's got the best damn bakery in 100 miles. And thanks so much to our phone line sponsor, Jason over at Wits End Classic Barbershop. You can call us on the Wits End Classic Barbershop hotline. He is on the square in West Plains. Excellent opportunity for you to get your hair cut. Get over there and visit.
Is God losing his relevance? This week on The Alan Colmes Show, do traditional Christian teachings have any place in the modern world? Controversial Pastor Rob Bell joins me to tackle the misconceptions about God as we move into a new era. Plus, has the Great Recession caused a lost generation of people? And psychic Jeffrey Wands with a fascinating look at the future this week on The Alan Colmes Show.
Weekdays 9 to midnight. It's The Alan Colmes Show on the Ozark's Best News Talk, 107.1 The Point.
Weather sponsorships are now available on News Talk 107.1 The Point. Get more information. Email info@diamondmediaradio.com for complete details.
From the Point Weather Center, a winter storm watch is in effect for this morning. A clear sky, mostly sunny through the day today. The high temperature 46 degrees, mainly clear tonight, low 24. Becomes cloudy tomorrow with snow developing, high 36. Snow heavy at times for tomorrow night, low 28. Rain and snow Friday. I'm meteorologist Jim Rinaldi, and for more information, visit my1071thepoint.com.
They say that people actually suffer from anxiety if they don't know where their cell phone is. And you know what they call it now? Are you ready? Nomophobia. There are other phobias like boobtubophobia. That's when you're afraid of missing Judge Judy. Okay, the worst of all is commandophobia.
Saturdays noon to 3 for the Kim Commando Show, and weekdays at 7:20 for your digital minute. That's Kim Commando on the Ozark's Best News Talk.
The Supremacy Clause of the Constitution has a clear and specific statement. The Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof. Before you go any further, what is the key operative word? It's even capitalized. The Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof. All laws must be made pursuant to the Constitution, not as an effort to do an end run around it. In other words, the Supreme Court is not the final arbiter of what is legal and what is not legal. The supreme law of the land are only those acts which are made in pursuance of the Constitution. And if they are not made in pursuance of the true nature of the Constitution, then they are not law at all. Dr. Livingston, who's an Emory University professor, has this to say: but who is to decide whether an act is or is not in pursuance of the Constitution? Some would say the Supreme Court. The court may indeed express an opinion, but it cannot have the final say. That can only be vested in the supreme authority that ratified the Constitution and gave it the force of law, namely the people of the several states. Only the states themselves have the final say over what their powers are. And Madison said that if the central government should intrude into the states' reserved powers, the states would have a duty to interpose themselves and protect their citizens from harm. I'm going to confirm that with you by a statement from Calhoun from 1836. For it is not possible to distinguish practically between a government having all power and one having the right to take what powers it pleases. The explanation must, it appears to me, be sought in the fact that in every free state there are those who look more to the necessity of maintaining power than guarding against its abuses. The Judiciary Department pertaining to the Judiciary Department, I am fully sensible of its importance and would maintain it to the fullest extent in its constitutional powers and independence. But it is impossible for me to believe it was ever intended by the Constitution that it should exercise the power in question, or that it is competent to do so, and if it were, that it would be a safe depository of that power. This reason applies equally to all others where Congress perverts a power from an object intended to one not intended, the most insidious and dangerous of all infractions, and which may be extended to all of its powers, more especially to the taxation and appropriations. Ladies and gentlemen, our founders were not fools. They were the ingenious authors, and quite frankly, let's understand something. They were not just the authors, because these principles had been developed and refined over hundreds of years before our Constitution came into being. Montesquieu, who came way before the founders, wrote all kinds of information that and theories and principles and concepts about natural law and God's law and nature's God's law. These are Cicero, 44 BC, was writing about natural law and how natural law is the only foundational law upon which governments can exist, the only foundation upon which they can stand. Everything else is tyranny. Everything. If governments are not founded upon the natural law that man is first and foremost in his right to make his own choices and his own decisions, no government can stand, because they will descend, if they have not already, into ruthless totalitarianism. In 1798, and 1799, there were two documents that were written that very clearly outline what the principles of nullification are. And the value of those documents, I strongly encourage you to read them, because these are the principles upon which our nation was built, and these are our founders expositing on why the principles of nullification allow an intermediary step before a state felt that it had the right to secede. Secession would destroy the Union. Once a state separates itself from the Union by secession, it is no longer a part of that Union, and therefore it has broken the compact. But there is an intermediary step. Let me just read something to you that was, and I tell you, this book that I'm reading called Nullification is done by Thomas Woods, and I'm telling you, it is a wealth of information about, and it pulls. He's got documents quoted in here that you can't even find on the internet. He went and researched these from the libraries of Congress and all of their past writings and so forth. To avoid secession, states have the right to nullify. And I don't want to beat a dead horse with a dead dog, but Calhoun, and by the way, who has been so demonized by our government and by society and our education system, stripped of all its covering, the naked question is whether ours is a federal or a consolidated government, a constitutional or absolute one, a government resting ultimately on the solid basis of the sovereignty of the states or on the unrestrained will of a majority, a form of government, as in all other unlimited ones, in which injustice and violence and force must finally prevail. Let it never be forgotten that where the majority rules without restriction, the minority is subject, and that if we should absurdly attribute to the former the exclusive right of construing the Constitution, there would be, in fact, between the sovereign and the subject, under such a government, no Constitution at all. The states have the right, and Thomas Jefferson, the rightful judge of the mode and measure of redress, is a clarified statement. And that was Jefferson. You see, the idea is this. Like, you've heard me talk about the Second Amendment being the principle of MAD, mutually assured destruction. The principle of nullification is the principle of MAD at play in sovereignty. Why is that? Because it is an intermediary step. It is a solution step prior to secession, which is MAD, mutually assured destruction. The state separates itself by secession from the Union. That breaks the Union and is ultimate destruction, both for the state and the Union. However, interposition or nullification is an intermediary step which allows the state independently to declare a rule that they cannot live under to be void on its face. If the state, and by the way, there is no way that you can take the idea that a state has agreed to a compact and say that that state is not able to determine what its own mind shall be. If a state chooses and declares that it has an opportunity to, well, here you go. The error is in the assumption that the general government is a party to the constitutional compact. The states as has been shown, formed the compact, acting as sovereign and independent communities. The general government is but its creature. I couldn't have said it better. The general government is the creature of the states. The states are the master. The general government has no authority but that which is delegated by the states. We'll be right back. When we come back, I swear we're going to do an entire seminar on nullification because it's so important.
The best selection of firearms, ammunition, and accessories can only be found at West Plains Pawn and Jewelry.
Online at westplainspawn.com.
Top of the line new and used optics from Nikon, Leopold, Burris, Redfield, Zeiss, and Schmidt & Bender. Ask about their selection of binoculars, laser sights, and night vision goggles. With new arrivals every week, the area's best selection of firearms, ammunition, and accessories can only be found at West Plains Pawn and Jewelry, 1713 West U.S. Highway 160, or shop online at westplainspawn.com.
I know what you're thinking, Bunk. You're thinking, did he fire 6 shots or only 5?
Dirty Harry gets all his ammo from the battery station. John Rambo, you guessed it. He gets his ammo from the battery station, too. So if you need ammo, go to the place where the guys who know about ammunition go, the battery station. They have one of the largest supplies of ammunition in the area. So make sure you're stocked up and don't get low on shells. Go to the battery station at 303 Washington Avenue in West Plains.
TLR Shows presents a gun and knife show at the Mountain Grove Family Youth Center on Saturday, March 23rd from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Sunday, March 24th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. The show is open to the public. Admission is $5 for both days. Children under 12 are free with a paying adult. All firearm laws will be obeyed and concessions will be available. Make plans to attend the gun and knife show at the Mountain Grove Family Youth Center, located at 1 YMCA Drive in Mountain Grove, Saturday, March 23rd and Sunday, March 24th.
Another year older, another birthday blood. Not when you're listening to the Birthday Club here on 107.1 The Point each morning during the morning show. Proudly presented by Ryan's Family Restaurant. Call in your loved ones, your mom, dad, grandma, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, nieces, whoever, for their chance to be the winner of a great buffet and drink from Ryan's Family Restaurant. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you from 107.1 The Point and Ryan's Family Restaurant.
You know, tell you what, we're going to run out of time, and it's really important that we understand what we can do immediately. I mean, theory and understanding the principles of nullification are critically important, but I want you to call Chris Koster's office. I want you to call 573-751-3321. That's 573-751-3321. When you call there, I want you to tell Mr. Koster's office that you understand the principles of nullification and interposition, and that you fully support his appeal against this outrageous ruling by this judge. Because what's really important, what's really crucially, truly important for us to understand is that we have the right as individuals and as a state to take action to demand that our state interpose itself against the federal government, to step in the way of the bullet, if you will. The state is our bodyguard. It must act as our bodyguard. The state doesn't have an obligation, a right to do that. It has an obligation and a duty to do that. That's not me saying that. That's James Madison. Madison says that if the federal government should intrude into the states' reserved powers, the states have a duty to interpose and protect their citizens from harm. Chris Koster is, at this moment, our knight in shining armor. He must lead this charge. We cannot do it without him. We have an obligation ourselves to participate in our own future. We have an opportunity to demand and declare the sovereignty and the independence and the freedom of our state, free of subversive abuse and tactics by the federal government, who does nothing more than attempt to absorb and abscond with the power that is not delegated to it. Your duty is not simply to show up and vote in November. That's the equivalent of showing up for work on time. That's the basic requirement. But when you get there, you must accomplish the task which you have been given. In order to earn your keep, you must function. You must work. You must complete a task or a series of tasks. Your job now is to complete your tasks. That requires you to participate. That requires you to think critically. That requires you to be using your rational and reasoning mind, which is the only thing that we have that separates us from the dogs and the cats and the cattle and the sheep. You have an obligation to do more than just show up in November and vote. That doesn't cut it. Just because you show up at 9 o'clock and you punch your card, does that mean you're entitled to a paycheck? Of course not. Of course not. From the time that you punch in at 9 until you go out at 5, you're expected while you're there to complete a certain set of tasks and duties. You, as a living, breathing beneficiary of our republic, are required to do more than just punch that card in November. Don't just punch the time clock in November and say, from here on, I abdicate all responsibility. I have no duties. I can just punch out at 5 and go home. And I can sleep between 9 and 5. Is that what you believe? If you do, then you truly do not understand your role. Your job now, we are after 9. We are before 5. You must participate. You must play an active role. At your job, do you sit around and wait for your supervisor to say, okay, now go take out the trash? Let's even go further. Don't just go take out the trash. Walk over to that can. Take the lid off that can. Grasp that bag by the flaps. Separate the flaps and pull them apart. Now overlap them. Now pull one through under the other. Now lift the bag. Now turn and put the bag down. Now put the can lid back on the can. Now take that bag and walk. Now open the door. Of course not. If we needed that kind of instruction to do the most basic tasks, we would be no more than automatons or robots. But we are not. We are living, breathing, thinking, reasoning, critically thinking, rational human beings. And so we know our task. And you don't wait for after you've taken that garbage out to be told to go to the next place and take that can out too. You know that the next logical proceeding function that you have is to put that bag out and go get another one. Your political life is no different. None whatsoever. I have no interest in politics, you say. Great. Politics takes you as a very, very strong interest. You can deny reality, but you can't deny the consequence of denying reality. Just because you don't think it matters doesn't mean it doesn't. You can cross the street with blinders on, blithely pretending that nothing is going to happen to you. But the bus barreling down the road at 50 miles an hour is going to hit you. Just because you want to ignore the fact that the bus is barreling down the road doesn't mean it's not going to hit you. Your obligation is to pick up the telephone today or write to Mr. Koster's office and explain in well-reasoned, articulate language you support the concept of interposition and nullification, that you've done a little bit of homework, and I plead with you to go to our website and go to Facebook and understand, read these articles, read these stories first, so that you have a sense of understanding of what you are talking about. The 10th Amendment Center, I've got a link up there. They've got an article entitled "The States' Rights Tradition No One Knows." I plead with you to go read that. Then I ask you to go read this article on the New American. Just go to thenewamerican.com if you don't have access to our Facebook page. By the way, you don't have to be a Facebook user to get there. Just simply go to facebook.com/America's Voice Now. Or go to americasvoicenow.org. These articles are there. Read them. Understand the principles upon which we're talking. You don't have to be a constitutional scholar. You just need to understand the foundational concepts. Then call Chris Koster's office at 573-751-3321. 573-751-3321. I don't care if you live down in Arkanistan. I want you to pick up the telephone and call his office today. I don't care if you lie and tell him you're from Missouri. Do it. Why? Well, because where there is smoke, there is fire. States across the nation are declaring their sovereignty and demanding their 10th Amendment independence. Missouri needs to be in the forefront of that. Getting this case into the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court will have to finally take a stand and either show the evil that it is masked by its portrayal of constitutionality or not, will define where our nation goes. We must bring this boil to a head. This is a boil which is festering in our nation. And there is only one way to break the back of federal usurpation, and that is for the states to declare their sovereignty. I don't think nullification is actually working. Oh, really? Then how do you think that Washington and Colorado just passed the rule that their people can smoke dope just for recreational purposes? That is nullification, people. That's an example of nullification. They have nullified federal law. They turned around and said, we don't really care what the federal law says about marijuana use. You can smoke it just to get high. Not for medicinal purposes, not for any other reason, just because you want to get high. Ladies and gentlemen, that's nullification on a principle which I don't even agree with. But I agree with the concept that they have the right to make their own declaration. I don't smoke weed. Don't care at all about it. If it didn't exist on the planet, I would never even notice it. Call Chris Koster's office, 573-751-3321. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. Also, americasvoicenow.org. When you get to that Facebook page, I want you to share, hit the share button at the bottom of this story, and I want you to share it on your personal Facebook pages. Then I want you to share it in an email, the link to it, to 100 other people that you know. Just get the word out. Tomorrow we have Jason Smith. Be here.
Ladies and gentlemen,
this is KBMV Birch Tree is the Ozarks best news talk, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Fox News Radio. I'm Dave Anthony. For the first time since he took office, President Obama's